In the world of concept cars, there are projects that are bold, strange, spectacular, or simply beautiful. The 1989 Sbarro Osmos belonged to a very small group of cars that managed to be all of those things at once. Even the very first encounter with this machine left you unsure where to focus your eyes. On the low-slung, almost cosmic silhouette, on the massive rear wing, on the red interior, on the chrome exhaust pipes rising like a metallic spine, or perhaps on the wheels that looked as if someone had forgotten to install their centers. And those empty wheels were precisely the heart of the entire project. The Osmos was not just another exercise in Franco Sparrow's imagination, but a rolling laboratory for one of the boldest patents in automotive history. The orbital wheel, a wheel without a conventional hub. Presented at the Geneva Motor Show in 1989, the Osmos was meant to prove that even something as basic as a car wheel could be reinvented from scratch. That is why the car is still remembered today, not only as an exotic super coupe, but also as one of the most radical attempts ever made to rethink the very foundations of automotive design. To understand where the Osmos came from, you first have to understand Franco Sparrow himself. Born in Italy but working in Switzerland, Sparrow had for decades been known as a designer who refused to recognize any boundaries between art, engineering, and automotive madness. Before creating the Osmos, he had built replicas of classic cars, designed his own cars and motorcycles, developed strange technical experiments, and produced whole series of vehicles that looked as if they had arrived from another planet. In his world, a car was never a finished formula, but a starting point for asking questions. What if the engine were placed differently? What if the frame were completely rethought? What if the suspension, or even the wheel itself, could be redesigned from zero? It was exactly this kind of thinking that led him to the idea of the orbital wheel, a concept he had already been working on since the early 80s. Before the Osmos appeared, Sparrow tested his Hubless wheels on motorcycle prototypes, and only later decided to transfer the concept to a car. By 1989, he was already a constructor of enormous reputation, regularly presenting his creations in Geneva, and the Osmos was meant to become one of the strongest proofs that Sparrow could do far more than just shock the public. He could dress a radical engineering idea in the form of a full-fledged supercar. The name Osmos was not accidental. It was expanded as Original Sbarro Osmos orbital system, which immediately revealed that the entire project revolved around a new type of wheel and a collaboration between Franco Sparrow and the people interested in developing the patent. Some sources mention Dominique or Philippe Motas, while the company behind the patent appeared under names such as Sbarro Motas Engineering and later was linked to Globe Holding in Geneva. Regardless of those organizational details, the essence remains the same. The Osmos was not a random prototype invented only for show car sensation, but a deliberate demonstrator of a technology that was intended to be developed further and potentially licensed. Sparrow understood that the very concept of a wheel without a hub was too abstract for the public if it was shown merely as a separate component. That is why he built an entire car around it. Low, wide, loud, theatrical, and visually arresting, so that no one could miss where to look. The Osmos was meant to make the public marvel first, and only then begin asking how exactly it all worked. And that is exactly what happened. At the 1989 Geneva show, the car drew attention not only because of its bizarre wheels, but because of its entire presence, becoming one of the most memorable attractions on the Sparrow stand. The most revolutionary element of the Osmos was, of course, its hubless orbital wheels. In a conventional car, the wheel rotates around a central hub and axle. Sparrow decided to eliminate that center entirely and make the ring itself do the work. According to technical descriptions, the rim consisted of two cooperating elements, while forces were transferred as low as possible, close to the road surface, through very small bearings and an appropriately engineered transmission system. The theoretical advantages looked impressive: lower unsprung mass, a lower center of gravity, better brake ventilation, fewer non-working structural parts, and more direct transfer of drive and braking forces. Gordon Murray himself later admitted that the idea of a wheel without a center made sense in pure theory. The problem was that what looked brilliant as a concept required almost surgical manufacturing precision, extremely expensive materials, and solutions to a whole list of problems involving durability, sealing, loads, and reliability. That is exactly why the orbital wheel remained above all a demonstration of possibility. Even so, it was something extraordinary. One of the rare cases where a designer did not merely try to improve an existing solution, but literally threw away its most important element and declared that from now on it would be done differently. The Osmos as a car was designed to emphasize those innovative wheels, but it was never limited to them. This was a full-size, highly dramatic supercoupe. The car measured roughly 4.5 meters in length, 2 meters 10 centimeters in width, and just 1 meter in height. It was absurdly low and extremely wide. The wheelbase was around 2,850 millimeters, which only reinforced the impression that the car sat on the road like a racing prototype. The body was made of polyester and fiberglass, and its silhouette was built from long, muscular surfaces, flowing contours, and a very compact cabin. Seen from the side, the car looked almost like an aerodynamic sculpture. Seen from above, it resembled a cross between a supercar and a futuristic jet aircraft. On top of that, the upward opening doors intensified the theatrical nature of the entire design. The Osmos did not look like a car that was meant to be pretty in any classical sense. It looked like an object designed specifically to provoke disbelief. Visually, the Osmos was very much a Sbarro creation, yet at the same time it was surprisingly coherent. The front of the car was low, smooth, and stretched out, with narrow lamps hidden deep in the bodywork and a sharply raked windshield that almost blended into the rest of the shape. The cabin formed something like a glazed bubble, and above the engine there were those unmistakable chrome intake and exhaust pipes. Together with the wheels, they became the second great visual signature of the Osmos. At the rear, attention was drawn to the huge wing and to the very wide rear wheels, which even incorporated aerodynamic elements within them. Looking at the back of the body, it was easy to feel that Sparrow had deliberately wanted to build a car that was exaggerated, almost comic book-like, yet never devoid of purpose. It was not a caricature of a supercar, but a very conscious, almost sculptural exaggeration of one. In an era when motor show prototypes could already be daring, the Osmos still stood out above the crowd, not so much because of sheer extravagance, but because of the consistency of its vision. Behind the driver and passenger sat a Jaguar 5.3-liter V12, producing around 350 horsepower. The engine was mounted centrally, which meant that the Osmos was not merely a stylistic exercise, but a true supercar layout with the engine placed behind the cabin. A V12 suited the character of the car perfectly: smooth, powerful, prestigious, and appropriately theatrical. What is more, the Osmos did not even try to hide it. On the contrary, the entire exhaust system was exposed to the maximum, turning the chromed pipes into something close to decorative sculpture. That is why, in many photos and period reports, it is genuinely difficult to decide what is the bigger attraction, the hubless wheels or those spectacular twisting pipes rising over the rear section of the car. As for performance, the figures most often quoted were less than 5 seconds from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour and a top speed of around 266 kilometers per hour. The Osmos was never intended to fight for official speed records. Its mission was rather to prove that such a bizarre technology could exist in a car that, on paper, was still a fully legitimate exotic coupe. The interior of the Osmos was surprisingly simple, but never random. Red dominated the cabin. The upholstery, the seats, the side panels, and the overall atmosphere made the interior look like the cockpit of something halfway between a racing car and an experimental aircraft prototype. The dashboard was not overloaded. It was rather clean and focused on the essentials, with a classic three-spoke steering wheel and a row of switches. One of the most distinctive details was the pair of helmet storage spaces, one for each occupant, located at the base of the doors. It was a small detail, but it said a great deal about the philosophy of the car. Sparrow wanted the Osmos to look like a machine ready for hard driving, even if in reality it remained primarily a technology demonstrator. The cabin did not try to imitate a limousine or a luxury grand tourer. It was theatrical, austere in certain respects, but entirely consistent with the rest of the concept. The red interior contrasted with the dark, almost black bodywork, and with the metallic shine of the exhaust pipes. In an era when many concept cars had interiors that were pure fantasy and completely unrealistic, the Osmos looked like a car you could actually enter, shut the door, and set off in. As for the number of cars built, the matter is relatively clear. The Sbarro Osmos was essentially a one-off prototype, created for the Geneva show as a demonstration of orbital wheel technology. There is no reliable evidence that even a small series of such cars was ever built. Yes, the wheel technology was later used in other demonstrators. 3 motorcycles shown alongside the Osmos in Geneva, and later in several additional car and motorcycle prototypes developed after the patent was sold. In that sense, the Osmos system lived on, but the Osmos car itself remained a unique single example. Later, Sparrow and his partners continued experimenting with the Osmos wheel concept in other projects, including motorcycles, later concept vehicles, and the much later orbital concept of 2009, which reminded the world that Franco Sparrow had never entirely abandoned the idea. So if the question is, how many Osmos cars were built? The most honest answer is 1 car only, although the orbital wheel patent itself went on to have later incarnations. So why did this idea never conquer the automotive world? The answer is rather brutal, because it was too complex, too expensive, and too demanding technologically for the reality of series production. A wheel without a hub looks fantastic, offers a list of potential advantages, and instantly attracts attention. But in the real world, it still has to withstand impacts, dirt, water, huge forces, thousands of kilometers of driving, and everyday use by an owner who does not want to travel with a team of engineers. All of that meant that orbital wheel technology remained more of a promise than a ready-made solution for a major manufacturer. In the early 90s, Sparrow sold the patent to the Swiss company Globe Holding, which developed it for some time under the Osmos name and tested it in various projects. But in the end, no major car maker decided to bring the idea into actual production. That does not mean the idea was bad. Rather, it was ahead of its time and required a level of precision and cost that destroyed its commercial logic. In the world of concept cars, such ideas can shine for years. In the world of accounting and homologation, it is much harder. Estimating the present value of the Osmos is difficult, because we are talking about a unique car that practically never appears on the open market. There is no reliably documented sale of the Osmos itself, so any precise number would be more speculation than fact. What can honestly be said is this. As the only example, built by Franco Sparrow, shown in Geneva, powered by a Jaguar VA12, and carrying one of the strangest wheel technologies in automotive history, the Osmos would today be worth far more than the usual appraisal of a classic prototype. For a collector specializing in 1980s concept cars, Sbarro creations, or breakthrough engineering patents, such a car could easily be worth at least several $100,000, and with the right auction staging, probably more. The problem is that the market for unique concept cars is extremely narrow, and it depends less on catalog formulas than on whether 2 people meet who truly understand what the car represents. The Osmos does not have Ferrari's legend, Lamborghini's brand power, homologation papers, or a production lineage. But it has something that cannot be measured by any simple formula: absolute uniqueness. And that is usually the most expensive thing of all. Today, The Sbarro Osmos remains one of those cars that best show what motor shows once were and what automotive imagination was once capable of. This was not a car created to earn 5-star safety ratings, to squeeze in a giant touchscreen, or to optimize a lease subscription. It was a pure experiment, a manifesto of engineering courage, and proof that even something as obvious as a wheel can be challenged. The Osmos never entered production, never changed the rules of the market, and never started a new era of hubless cars. But it left behind something else. The memory of a time when designers really tried to invent the future from zero. Franco Sparrow was one of the last great automotive visionaries of that kind, and the Osmos is one of the purest expressions of the way he thought. Low, wide, absurd, beautiful, complicated, and completely impractical, which is exactly what a truly great concept car should be.